G'day and welcome back to the next module in how to start your own QS consultancy. And in this module, we're going to tap into the basics of starting your own consultancy. So you've made the decision that this may or may not be something for you, and you're looking to move to the next step and make it a real and viable business that you can start to move forward with. So one of the first things that you're going to need to do, and this may seem obvious, but you'll need to decide on a name for your business. Now, what I would suggest when you're thinking about this, a lot of people decide to craft or concoct a fancy name, something that they think is going to get the attention. Now, from my perspective, if you're looking to sell, you have to think forward. If you're looking to sell your service, your name needs to be associated with what you provide. Okay, because it makes it an easier sell when you go to the market. People understand what you do. The simpler you make it, the more effective your marketing will be. So historically, I've seen people craft some great names, and don't get me wrong, they're very ingenious as to how they're constructed, and people have put a lot of thought into them about, what they relate to and how the word comes together and all of this type of thing. But when you're going to the market and you're trying to sell your service with a fancy name, it becomes difficult for people to associate what you actually do. So you're going to be a quantity surveyor. You're going to be providing financial inputs to building projects, or you're going to be helping contractors, subcontractors, those type of things. So you need to really think ahead and cover all your bases as to who you're going to serve. And I'll be covering marketing your practice more deeply in another module. But this is important for setting the name of your business. Keep it simple. I can't stress that enough. You can for sure go and craft the best name that you think is out there. But some of the easiest people that, some of the easiest ways to get work is just to keep it simple, so that people understand when you pick up the phone or you send emails or you use social media to do marketing, people can immediately associate what your service is. Okay, and they can make a very quick, conscious decision about whether it's for them or, to politely tell you to move on or whatever. But if it's a confusing name, when you come cold calling to someone with a confusing name, confused people are never going to be interested. That's a marketing principle 101. The confused mind will never buy. So that's why you need to keep it very, very simple. So have a think about the name. One of the easiest ways to do that is just maybe, take your name, simplify it. If you're, called John Smith, just call yourself, JS Quantity Surveying, and have done with it, because, that's as simple as you can get. And it works from a marketing perspective as well. If you're obviously in locations where quantity surveying is not the terminology, you're more inclined to be called a cost engineer or whatever it may be, then apply the same for what people understand in your location. So I think with that enough said, I will move on to the next stage of things. Once you've set your name, you need to decide the legal entity of the structure, your vehicle that is going to be used for providing these services. Okay, now this really is dependent upon your location, so I cannot give you any specific advice. I'm based here in New Zealand. If you're based anywhere else in the world, different rules and regulations are going to apply as to how you can set up companies, who can set up companies, and their legal status. If you are in any way, shape or form concerned, then probably the simplest advice I can give you is to find someone who specializes in company formations and who can explain to you and guide you the best way to be protected in your location. Okay. Now, I can't really say any more than that because I don't know each and every location of every individual that is going to watch this, but it is very, very important that you take the professional advice to protect yourself. The last thing that you want to be doing is running a company and having all of the risk of yourself and your assets being exposed when you're in business. So you need a correct and proper legal structure to be established. Generally, it costs money. Here in New Zealand, it's a limited company, a limited liability company. You set it up through a vehicle company's house. I think it's the same in the United Kingdom. In the States, they are LLCs, but essentially you go and talk to a specialist who can advise you based on the parameters of the business, which is the best protective vehicle that you can use. And I would probably go further and speak to a lawyer as well and ensure that you have a vehicle and a mechanism to protect yourself and all of your personal assets when you commence a business. This is very important. We always imagine that nothing will ever go wrong, and 99 times out of 100 nothing does ever go wrong, particularly for the likes of quantity surveyors. We're generally providing high value services and we don't get ourselves too much into trouble. And when we do, and I'll be covering this later, we fall back onto a professional indemnity insurance, and that's generally the end of it. But sometimes things can get messy and complicated. I've seen it with other people and other businesses, and you want that protection in place as your final insurance measure to make sure that nobody can come and attack your personal assets in business, okay? Because it can happen. And that's why it's important to speak to someone who is a specialist in your location about the best way to set up a legal entity, and then maybe even further to speak to a lawyer. This is not high cost stuff. It's very straightforward generally. As to whether you need any additional protective measures. So, for example, here in New Zealand, we have things called a family trust. And once you establish that and there's time and certain other parameters, it means that all your personal assets are protected in a bubble. So whatever your location, you need to, as I've said, just take that specialist advice, because I can't say as part of this course that XYZ is what you need to do, and then you're operating in a country where that doesn't apply. I'm exposing you unnecessarily to your own rules and regulations, so that is very important that you understand that. Okay, so now, again, based on your location, you need to establish whether there are any requirements for licensing, permits, other legal mechanisms that apply in your country. Again, that should all be flushed out when you speak to the specialist who will establish your company as to whether there are any additional permits. Again, here in New Zealand, there's not. You can operate once you're established as a legal entity. Then there's no additional permits that are required to run a consulting, or put more specifically, a quantity surveying business. But I'm, obviously appreciating that not every country is the same, and that there may be some countries where you do need to register at like a local or a state level or whatever it may be, and pay a fee, like a registration fee or something like that. I don't know, but you need to understand and check that out. You need, in essence, what I'm saying is you need to make sure that all your legal bases are covered, so that when you're operating the business, you're not operating illegally, and that someone can come in at a future point and dish out fines and that type of thing. That's not what you want. You want to ensure that your business is credible and has all the permits, all the paperwork in place before you actually start conducting your business. Okay, now what we're going to do now is come on to insurance and risk management. Excuse me while I just have a bit of a mouth freshener there, a bit of coffee. So again, this is not compulsory, but my take on it is that, well, again, it may be compulsory in your country, but here it's not. But irrespective, you need, again, I have to emphasize, check insurances. If they're required, you need them in place. But even if they're not, my take on this is that you're always better to be protected. So there's a number of insurances that could be at play. So you need to consider, for example, let's go to a basic level and say, if you're traveling to sites with a vehicle that you probably own, then you need to ensure that your insurer now understands that you are using your vehicle for business and not personal situations, because again, you do not want to get yourself into a situation where you are, or it comes out that you have been traveling, you haven't notified an insurer, and you've been traveling to a site and some bright spark works out that that's business travel and you are no longer covered under your insurance. Okay, so all of this due diligence is required. You then probably have, and we have it here, these are compulsory insurances, like general insurances to protect against damage to others. Okay, public liability is what we call it here. I think it's generally accepted as that sort of similar language in most other places. For us in New Zealand, that's required by law. But again, speak to an insurance broker in your Pacific location, and they will be able to guide you. Once you know the legal entity, you obviously know what type of business you're conducting. They will give you a full proposal for requirements of insurances to meet the legal obligations. And then one stage further than that, there is professional indemnity insurance. Now, in my experience, a lot of people that are coming in starting their own consultancy, they delay the professional indemnity insurance. And the reason why is because it's not a particularly cheap insurance. It tends to be quite expensive. Now, at the end of the day, it's up to you. It's your business. You choose how to manage it. But I never have been in a position where I have said I am not going to sign up for professional indemnity insurance. Okay, so again, it's your choice, but it's a business expense that you have to plan for. Speak to your local, again, insurance brokers and find out just exactly how much premiums are. And then you just have to factor that, and that becomes part of your rate, charge out rate, and it becomes an expense. So you have the revenue and the expense balanced. Hopefully you're not losing money on it, but it is a protection. But I do see a lot of the smaller entities, they say, oh, Paul, I can't afford it, or nothing will ever happen to me, or I'll just write a term and condition into the proposal that no one, like the value of anybody coming back to me for anything cannot exceed the fee and this type of thing. Now, that's not always the case in law. You are not necessarily protected when you write certain clauses if they're at conflict with other common law principles. Particularly around tort and contract, and if there is any Pacific legislation that talks about unfair contract terms, sometimes lawyers can manipulate those wordings and come back to you and say, well, that term and condition, even though my client signed it, is null and void because XYZ. So just be conscious and careful of all of that. Again, it's your choice. Do the due diligence, but my advice would be, if you're running a consultancy and you fully intend to be professional and to run it professionally, then I think it is kind of like a false economy, personally, not to have professional indemnity insurance. Okay, so, and then there will be other things like if you're purchasing assets for the company. We'll get on a bit further when we talk about things that you need within your consultancy. If you were to buy like, laser measurers and these type of things, you might want to consider insurance for your assets as part of the business. So if anyone kind of wanders off with them, or they get broken, or this type of thing, then you have some type of protection. Unlike professional indemnity insurance, I personally never bothered with that myself, because I found that the premiums were kind of like a big disconnect to the value of the assets that I was trying to insure. and I therefore just chose personally to take a risk on it. The only exception being I used a 3D scanner, which is a very, very expensive piece of equipment, so that was insured, but the smaller stuff I didn't. Excuse me again, but do your due diligence around that. I'm just really covering what you need to think about when you're setting up your business. Now, here's another one, and this is not commonly discussed or thought about, but you need to also make sure that you are protected for a concept called intellectual property, particularly if you're developing systems. Not using systems that you purchase because other people own the IP, but if you're developing even just basic things like spreadsheets that you are going to share with some of your clients who are contractors, for example, your logos, and we're going to be talking about branding in another module, your logos, your business name, you may want to consider just taking protective measures around those intellectual property components. The reason being is that it doesn't necessarily stop people stealing your ideas or using your logos for other means that are not congruent with what you intended them to be used for. But it certainly helps if you have protection in place, because it's the first line of defense to say to people, look, there are consequences. I've spent time and brain power putting these things together, and I'm willing to share them with you, but only under the terms and conditions that I choose, and these are all IP protected. So that's a further thought. Obviously what we do, some of it has to be shared and cannot be IP'd because the client is paying you for your time, so you can't protect that necessarily. But any documents or assets, digital assets, for example, that you create that are not necessarily client specific, they are specific to your business, and you have spent time and effort crafting them and not necessarily selling them, then you need to be able to protect those assets to avoid people from taking them and claiming their own entitlement over them. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And the final one, really, from the sort of setting and making sure that you have all your legal bases covered, is making sure that you comply with any financial and taxation requirements in your location. This is incredibly important, and to this end, you do need, please do not have this person on board as part of your team when you're running a business. You do need an accountant, and bookkeepers are kind of okay, but really if you want to ensure full compliance with taxation and financial compliance in your location, you really do need to be speaking to an accountant who will be able to either guide you or preferably handle all of that on your behalf. Okay, you can use softwares where you do the bulk of the work in terms of the data entry, or you can get other people to do that for you, and the software automatically compiles things into profit and losses and everything else, and then the accountant will then just effectively audit it and make sure that you are compliant to the rules and regulations in your country. Either way is fine, but please ensure that you do have someone who is of a financial expert nature, like an accountant, that can make sure that you are fully compliant with taxation and financial compliance. Very, very important. So I'm going to wrap this lesson of the module up. This was, again, just talking about things to consider when, right at the beginning, this foundational stuff and your legal compliances. And we're going to be back in the next lesson of this module talking about other components of your consultancy now that you've got the foundation work out of the way. Okay, see you in the next one.